studying for the SATs when I was in the first grade. My parents are ministers, and they care about two things: Jesus and education. And I'm a professor at the Divinity School at Duke, so I guess it worked. But to begin, when we were in first grade, when we came home from school, we had our regular homework, and then my dad would assign 90 minutes of SAT prep work. Now, at the time, I didn't know it was SAT prep work, but then about 12 years later, when I took the SAT, I was taking it, and I was thinking, wow, this is remarkably familiar. I've been studying for this my whole life. And my parents really wanted us to be prepared for college. And so they would do things like lie to us. They told us that the only thing open in the summer was the library. And so they were like, school's closed, everything's closed, it's time to go to the library. So every single morning we would wake up and we'd spend our entire day at the library. We wouldn't come home until dinner time. And they also wanted us to be exposed to all different sorts of cultural events. So we had season tickets to the San Francisco Opera and the Symphony and the ballet. And when I was 5 years old, my first concert was a Leontyne Price concert. Meanwhile, all of my friends were at a Thriller concert at the same time. Another thing my parents did is they wanted us to get accustomed to being on college campuses. And so when I was in third grade, they enrolled us in Saturday Science Academy at UC Berkeley. And so every single Saturday, my brother and I would hop on the BART train and we would march up Telegraph Avenue to the UC Berkeley campus where we'd spend the whole day in the lab. And by the time I was 8 years old, I already felt like a college student. I felt comfortable on a college campus. It was kind of like a college campus at home too, though, because my dad went to Yale, and we had Yale everything. We had Yale toothbrushes, Yale cups, Yale pillowcases, Yale sweatshirts. Everything said Yale. And we had all of these family rules, like we weren't allowed to make up words. We had to use actual English words. And so sometimes my dad would make up a word, and we'd say, hey, you broke the rule. You made up a word. And he'd say, I went to Yale. I get to make up words. And so we would think, wow, look at these perks. Like if you go to a great college, you get all these perks, like making up words. You know, my parents curated our formal education very specifically too, and so I went to Phillips Exeter Academy for high school, so it was really no surprise that I was accepted into a slew of top colleges, and I ended up matriculating at Dartmouth. Now, at the time, I was convinced that the reason why I was so successful in my educational career up to that point was because I was simply fabulous. I mean, they kept telling me, you're the best and the brightest, and I was like, it must be true. I'm the best and the brightest. We like to attribute our success to our individual characteristics. We like to think that it was our personal hard work that got us to where we were. I'm a social psychologist, and I've studied a lot of self-serving attributions. And this is something that we do. We want to interpret situations in ways that boost our self-esteem. So it's perfectly natural for someone like me to say, I'm successful because of all of the hard work and inner characteristics that I bring to the table. What I didn't know at the time, though, was that's not exactly true. I didn't know that I had actually won the lottery without even buying a ticket. What I didn't know was that I was one of the 11% of people in our society who grow up in families where both parents went to college. And research shows that if you're part of that 11%, you're more than 2.5 times as likely to get the tangible support that you need in order to go to a 4-year university. Now, these data, unfortunately, bring to the surface an uncomfortable truth, and that's that I can't take credit for all of my success. In fact, I am privileged. Society accommodates people who are part of my group, in this case, people who are children of the formerly educated, while alienating people who are part of another group, people who don't have formal education. And this is something that I have to grapple with, because once I got on this path, once I became part of the 11%, the world just opened up to me, and it's not something that I choose. Now, when I share my story with my students, they often push back and they say, Dr. Cleveland, you need to take more credit for your success. You worked hard for everything that you have. And my response to them is, you're right, I did work hard. I was there. I was there for all the all-nighters, and I wrote every last word of my dissertation. It's true. But to acknowledge that I have privilege in our society, to acknowledge that I was born into a family that put me on train tracks toward success, isn't to negate the hard work. It invites me to consider the ways in which other people who weren't born into my circumstances have not been supported in the ways that I've been supported. Social psychologists like to talk about privilege like it's the wind behind your back. Oftentimes, if you're walking down the street and the wind's behind your back, you don't even notice it. It just feels like a good day. But when we have the wind behind our back, our hard work is more likely to translate into success. What we put in is often what we get out. Now imagine what it's like for the wind to be against you. I've had a really intimate glimpse of that recently in my life. Before I came to Duke this past summer, I lived in Minnesota for the last 5 years, and I lived in a low-income, predominantly Black neighborhood in North Minneapolis. I was really involved in a lot of justice efforts in that neighborhood, and one of the things that I did was on Saturday mornings, about 15 girls from the local high school in the neighborhood would come over to my house for what I called breakfast club, and over waffles and eggs and bacon, we would talk about life, and we would study, and we would talk about their academic goals. And these girls were gorgeous, they were bright, they were hardworking, they were dreamers. They were African American, just like me, but the thing that we did not have in common is they are not part of the 11%. And they have not benefited from growing up in a family where both parents went to college. And beyond the family unit itself, they also haven't benefited from a world-class education. In fact, the high school 4 blocks from my house in North Minneapolis, severely under-resourced. Not only are there very few teachers, but there are no extracurricular activities, there are no sports, there are no electives, there are no modern languages. And beyond that, the curriculum that the school offers, this is a public high school, the curriculum that the school offers actually does not make the students who graduate eligible to apply to a 4-year college like Dartmouth or like Duke. And so these girls were born into a world in which the wind is always blowing against them, and all of their dreams and their hard work and their efforts and their hopes do not lead to success in the way that mine did. What they put in does not necessarily translate into what they get out. We live in a world where there is so much inequality, but we want to believe in the myth of individualism. We want to believe that everything that we do internally and individually leads to our life outcomes, and it's simply not true. Even in the United States, only 33% of adults are college educated. And in the broader world, only 1% of adults are college educated. We are the 1%. And once we join the ranks of that 1%, the whole world opens up to us. Having a Dartmouth education positioned me to go to one of the top PhD programs in social psychology, which positioned me to get a job at Duke, which has also given me opportunities to get book contracts and to go all over the world and to speak and to have a voice and have influence and have power and be upwardly mobile. And it all started because I was born into a family that put me on the track to be part of that 1%. Inequality is a towering and a complex problem, but we can begin to dismantle it if we look inward, if we take a self-reflective moment and we look to see how we have benefited from privilege, and we examine that. So I leave you with 3 things to consider as you move forward. 1, see your privilege. Understand it, seek to understand it. Think about the ways in which you have benefited from your situation. 2, talk about it. Talk about your privilege. Bring it up in conversations. Talk about it in your communities. Invite your friends to consider the ways in which they're privileged. And 3, use your privilege to make space for other people. It's so wonderful to hear about those of you who are giving money towards scholarships to create more opportunities. That's great, but we also need people who will start breakfast clubs, and we need people who will mentor and tutor, and we need people who will use their power and their influence to amplify the voices in our society that are not heard. And we need people to use their power and their influence to start to dismantle some of these larger structural issues. So see your privilege, talk about your privilege, use your privilege, and let's be the wind behind more backs. Thank you.